Good morning, class. Today we're going to talk about sentences, fragments, and run-ons. So if you want to turn to page 182 in your book, I know this lesson starts with 181, but we're just going to start with 282. That makes more sense to me. So look at page 182. Whew, it's early. Sorry, guys. 182, and this is what you should see. Sentences, fragments, and run-ons, and it starts with sentences. So this is what the lesson's going to cover for the next couple days is sentences, fragments, and run-ons. So let's get started. We're going to first talk about independent clauses. Now, this is probably new for most of y'all, but I just want you to think of an independent clause as a sentence. So a complete sentence is technically called an independent clause. Now, remember the word independent means it needs no help. It can stand alone by itself. It doesn't need any extra words to make it a sentence. For example, all of you are independent eaters, meaning you don't need your mom and dad to help you eat anymore. You can eat by yourself. Okay, you can completely complete a meal without any assistance. Well, that's the way these sentences work. Independent clauses are independent of any help. Independent clauses always have a subject and a verb. They always express a complete thought, and they always stand alone, meaning they don't need anything else to help them. They don't need any friends, any other friendly sentences to help them out. So here's an example, and there's one in your book as well. I have a record player, it's the one in your book, but here's the one on my board. Zoom out a little bit for you. Susan plays the violin. Well, this is a complete thought. It has a subject, Susan, and a verb, plays. And doesn't just leave it there, it completes the sentence with the direct object, violin, also known as a complement, meaning a completer. So with all these together, Susan plays the violin. This is a complete thought, and it can stand alone as a sentence. So that's an independent clause. Well, what's the opposite of an independent clause? That's right, a dependent clause. A dependent clause is dependent on other things to make it a complete sentence. So if you have a dependent clause by itself, it is not complete. It's like my children when they were babies. They were dependent on me or my husband to feed them. They could not feed themselves. They were not independent eaters, right, like they are right now. So a dependent clause, just like my babies, need help to be complete. But they do share some qualities with independent clauses in that they have a subject and a verb. That's the only thing they share, is that if it's a clause, it has a subject and a verb. However, where independent clauses with a subject and a verb can stand alone, dependent clauses are still missing something for them to be a complete sentence. So because they're missing that, they do not express a complete thought, and they cannot stand alone. So notice the only thing they have in common is the subject and the verb. All clauses have subjects and verbs. Independent clauses express a complete thought. Susan plays the violin, that's a complete thought. Whereas dependent clauses do not express a complete thought. Something is missing. When you read a dependent clause, you're left, what is going on? I don't understand what's going on. So let's look at my example. When you complete your chores, what's your first question? Well, what? What happens when I complete my chores? Do I get money? Do I get chocolate? Do I get to go play outside? Do I get to play on my tablet? What happens when I complete my chores? Do I have to do more chores? See, you're left wondering. This first sentence, my independent clause, you're not left wondering about Susan. You understand exactly what's going on with Susan. Susan plays the violin. That's complete. But this one, you're like, what's going on? It's a mystery. When I complete my chores, I don't know what happens. So that's what makes it a dependent clause. It is not a complete thought. We have our subject, you, and the verb complete, but the sentence is not complete. We're missing the complement. We're missing the completer of the sentence. So look at the example in your book. Okay, right here. When you return from the game, well, what happens when we return from the game? Do we get to eat dinner? Do we have to go to bed? What happens? So we're left wondering. So that's the idea of a dependent clause, is you're still left confused. Whereas an independent clause, the thought is complete, you understand what's going on, you know what to do. So all that to say, we don't want dependent clauses in our writing. Dependent clauses are a big no-no in grammar, and they're called fragments. So fragments are what we call serious errors, meaning you get the teacher look if you ever use a fragment in your writing. It's very serious. Your book defines a fragment as an unattached dependent clause. Basically, this is a fragment. If you had just written this when you complete your chores in a writing assignment, and put a period at the end of chores and said that this was a complete sentence, it's not a complete sentence. It is a dependent clause, which also means it is a fragment. And we do not want fragments in our writing. And so the exercise that you're going to do today, one of the things you're going to have to do is identify fragments. And they're super easy to identify because it's just like this one. You read it and you're like, I have no idea what's supposed to happen in this sentence. Yes, it has a subject and a verb, but I'm still left confused. So that's the idea of a fragment. So if you look over at the letters on page 182, it says a fragment sometimes contains a subject or a verb. So they're not always going to have a subject and a verb. Sometimes it's just going to be like the conductor during the performance, where there's a subject, but there's no action. We don't know what the conductor is doing during the performance. And drew several pictures for us. Well, we have the action, but who drew several pictures for us? So that's the idea of a fragment. Sometimes it's missing your subject or your verb, and then sometimes it's missing both. Tomorrow, period, in the bottom drawer, from this point to that one. So when you read phrases like this, when it doesn't have subject or a verb, and they're just left by themselves, that is a fragment. If you're missing if you're missing a subject or a verb, that's a fragment. Now, there is an exception, as we all know. We know about our command sentences and understood you sentences. These are not fragments, because some commands may be only one word. We still have a subject, and that's understood you is still your subject, go is your verb. So in this instance, it is not a fragment, because we still have our understood you and the command go. So we've done a lot of understood you sentences throughout the year, so you should be able to identify these by now. Just know those are the exception to the rule, the only exception to the fragment rule. So now we're going to flip over back. Whoop. You just saw behind the scenes teacher notes. Good for you. Okay. Now we're going to look at run-ons. Now we're not going to look at correcting run-ons right now, because you are not going to have to do that in your exercise. Let me check to make sure I'm 100% correct. Yes, I am right. Okay. So we're not going to stress about correcting run-ons right now. It is important to know that. But today I just want you to focus on being able to identify these things. So a run-on is a sentence that has two independent clauses smushed together. So to review, independent clause, subject, verb, complete thought stands alone. So in a run-on sentence, it has two of them smushed together. So if you look at your example again, the cookie tastes good, I like that one better. So we have our subject and our verb, So these are two independent clauses, two sentences that can stand alone, but there's no punctuation in there. Okay, so if you look at my board, I just wrote that sentence on the board. This cookie tastes good, I like that one better. So, like you can see in your book, I just referred on the board. Cookie is your subject, taste is your verb, and this dependent clause. And then I is your subject, like is your verb of that dependent clause. So we have two dependent clauses smushed together. Now, usually you're supposed to have some sort of punctuation between these independent clauses. You're supposed to have a semicolon. So if this were proper, if this were correct, let me erase that, I would put a semicolon and then it'd be good. Or I could leave my comma and put a coordinating conjunction like an and or but. Okay, so if those were there, it would be 100% correct. But since I do not have either of those there to connect the sentence, it is wrong. So this is what you have. When you have them with smushed two independent clauses together, it is wrong. That is, with no punctuation or with no comma, coordinating conjunction, it is wrong. And I want you to go back to basics. If this is confusing you, underline in each sentence in the exercise, underline the subject and the verb. If you see that the sentence does not have a subject or a verb, you know it's a fragment, correct. If you see that it has a subject verb in that order, subject verb in that order, but there's no semicolon, the dot comma, or there's no comma and a coordinating conjunction, then you know that's a run-on. Okay? So let's look at the second example. My friend is Amy. She lives next door. So you say, oh, Miss Flynn, there's a comma, so that one's good. That's a complete sentence. No. Okay? Because remember, I said up here, if it has a comma, it also has to have a coordinating conjunction. This one has the comma, but there's no coordinating conjunction, meaning the and, or the but, or the for, or the nor. So this one is still wrong. This one is still what we call a run-on. But let's do our basics. Okay, so what's my first subject of this one? Friend. What's my verb? Is. Okay, and then our second clause. She lives next door. What's my subject? She. What's my verb? Lives. Very good. So, but since it's just a comma, and there's no coordinating conjunction with it, that is a run-on. Because they smushed them together with just a comma. That's not good. So when you notice it either has no punctuation or just a comma, then you know that's a run-on. Now let's look at the other two on your book. A run-on may also consist of a group of sentences combined with too many conjunctions. This is what we traditionally see as a run-on. We went to the store and we bought some bananas and we talked to our neighbor who just returned from his vacation, but we still had time to return home and make our favorite cake, and then we went jogging. So that is a super, super long sentence. I actually see this in a lot of writing, and that it's just too many groups of sentences combined with too many conjunctions. So for this one, you just have to break them up. But if you see something like this, it's a classic run-on. In the letter D, it may consist of groups of sentences just combined with commas. With winter approaching, I became more anxious about skiing. Sledding is going to be fun too. I mostly like to skate on a frozen lake. So that's just combined with just commas. That's also considered a run-on. Okay, so in your exercise, you're going to have to identify whether it's a sentence or a run-on. So what we're going to do is we're going to look at this together. Make sure I don't tell you the answers here. Here we go. And you're going to complete this whole for homework. All you have to do today is tell me if the example is a run-on, a sentence, or a fragment, and make sure you go back to pages 181 to 182. Those will tell you the correct answers. Okay, you just have to compare them. So let's look at number 1. Please call me later. Oh, let's look at the example first. I'm sorry. The milk is old, it is sour. So this is a run-on. Notice I just put RO for run-on because there's just a comma, but there's no coordinating conjunction. There's no and, or, but, for, nor, yet. So, milk is old, comma, it's sour. So that is wrong. That's a run-on. So let's look at number 1. Please call me later. So what's your subject for number 1? If you said understood you, give yourself a pat on the back because that's a command sentence. Please call me later. And what's your verb? What do I want you to do? Call. So it would be your verb. Is there a complement? Is it completed? Yeah, when do I want you to call me? Later. Okay. So please call me later. Would that be a sentence, a run-on, or a fragment? That's correct. It is a sentence. So you just put an S right there. Okay, let's look at number 2. Fine. I know we all like to respond that way sometimes. Fine. Fine. But is that a complete sentence? No, it's just one word. And that's not a command. I'm not telling you to be fine. So that doesn't work that way. So you would put a what in the blank? All right, an F for fragment. Very good. So I want to look for one that's a run-on to show you run-on. So look down at number 5. So we're going to look down at number 5. You're going to go back and do 3 and 4. But let's look at number 5. The plant is wilting, water it. So what's your subject of the first clause? That's right, plant. What's your verb? Is. Very good. So subject to verb. Let's look at water it. What's your subject of this clause? Understood you. Yeah, we can have those in the second clause too. Good. So it'll be understood you as your subject. What's your verb? That's right, it's water. So we have two subject verb order, but notice there's just a comma separating them. There's no coordinating conjunction with the comma, and there's no semicolon. So what would you put in the blank? RO. Very good. Okay, y'all are going to ace this. You're going to do 1 through 15 for today, and you're going to turn that into me on Google Classroom. If you have any questions, I should be available most of the day. I have to run by the school to pick up my daughter's packet. But other than that, I will be available. Hope y'all have a great day. Happy Monday. Happy week of school. Yay. I'll see y'all later.